It's a very visual presentation that I've made. Some of you might also know the earlier parts of it, but okay. So the idea of bringing this conversation here, I think, is very important to clarify, because we said that this session is about community engagement. Um, I also wanted to clarify that there are both ways to engage with the community. One, to have an archiving project and make them participants, or to build archiving projects with the help of participants, right? So, which means it's purely invitation based. It's very similar to CPA 2022 itself, right? So, with that kind of an attitude, we have been doing certain kind of projects. And I just wanted to take us through this journey of how this exhibition in December happened in Bangalore. So, as I said, some of you might have heard of the earlier parts. Just bear with me because I needed to do a complete walkthrough for the purpose of documentation and I think my own articulation and for dissemination. So, the workshops on family archiving was the first step. This happened in the pandemic, on the onset of the pandemic, right? It was summer of 2020. And we started with one, we got more interest, so we offered another and then another. So, three online workshops happened. Within that time frame itself, the frameworks evolved. So first workshop was 7 8 days, and then 11 days, and then 15 days. 15 days was not continuous; it was alternate days. But one was trying to find new frameworks and the intention was very clear, that we are enabling the intentions of participants who want to work with archival practices. So over 30 participants worked with us, and we got some 50 interest communications. And the conversations largely moved around ideas of subjectivity and ideas of roles. What is curation versus what is archiving? Because these are very smaller workshops, right? And we also saw that these workshops were leading to already some form of output or an uh, impact. So this is Niyati's. This was Niyati's project while she was with us in the workshop, where she's looking at her nanny, maternal grandmother's sari collection, through which she wanted to know her. And this was also a part of her research project or interest in her postgraduate program where she was enrolled at that time. So she was able to use that exercise, the workshop, and actually convert it into a graduation paper. And it also became a website project, website experience website, where people could go and actually meander into the history and look at different aspects associated with the history of sari collection. But then what also happened is we got a lot of feedback in terms of saying, oh, but 15 days were less or 7 days were less. If there was more time, we would have done more. Or those who even couldn't join us for the workshop suggested that, if it was not happening continuously through a week, we might be able to spend more time on it. So then we offered the incubation program, the first edition of it, Constructing Personal Archives 2020. We made an open call because few of them had told us this. To our surprise, we got over 40 proposals. And then we had to get into this whole sorting and selection business, which we tried to do it as honestly as possible. And we selected 20 projects from across the globe. The idea was not, again, to show sort of any hype about being global or about being international. We went with the logic that the projects were already, material was substantial or was enough for us to be able to work with. Whereas there were some projects which were more intention oriented, they could have been for a shorter workshop. And for something as structured and long term as this incubation program, it felt better to work with projects which had already taken few steps ahead. And again, we got into what is the framework of enabling personal archiving. Most of these projects were around family histories, personal histories, much lesser the way we are thinking right now in terms of community, right? But there were a few, definitely, and there were a few about art practices also. Irrespective of that, our idea was to work with three kinds of formats. One was to have workshops, dedicated workshops on the four tools that are required for archiving. Basic four tools. These are not necessarily exhaustive list. Offer internal mentoring and have space for open dialogues where different kinds of archiving practitioners were invited from, again, from a global context, to talk about how they have worked with archives or curation or taken history into form of a publication or any other output. And what culminated is a finale or a seminar, which was spread across 2 evenings, 4 sessions. Both all our moderators, facilitators became our moderators as well, who helped us define the thematics of the panels. We had over 200 registered audiences from across the globe, and which also motivated us to sort of not leave it at a digital engagement level, but also do a short publication about it, which we called a compendium. So we didn't really bind it. We kept it as loose compendium, which the reader can reorganize and choose to read in a flow that they want to read. We Within the crowdfunding limit, we were able to make 70 hard copies. Rest of it, as soon as we had touched our crowdfunding goal, we also decided to make it digitally accessible. So it's now on issue.com, and people keep reading it as and when they get time. And all this content which I'm talking about is also edited and published as video recordings on YouTube. Right? So this was spring of 2021. And then Kitchen to Kacheri happened. Now, this was definitely not foreseen when we started, and this was definitely not even part of the plan. But the group itself was very motivated. Towards the end, the panel discussions had led to some very important questions about South Asian histories, about bringing the histories together. So, developing them as personal projects, but still bringing them together. What would happen if we bring them together from Pakistan, Sri Lanka, different parts of the country in India? Will they speak with each other? Will there be disparities? Will there be a conflict? So these questions were already there when we finished the finale. And hence, putting down a proposal together in May 2021 was not so difficult, except I was then dealing with a medical emergency, but all of them came on board, whoever was available. And we made a very sketchy proposal and sent it to Coach for their curatorial intensive South Asia program. And to our happiness, it got selected. Now, how did this transformation from constructing personal archives to the name of the exhibition basically happen? Sorry, I wasn't able to replace this image for some glitch. So what I wanted to show over here was an image of the kind of sessions that we had in the fellowship. So fall of 2022, the fellowship began. I was selected for it. I became sort of the face of the collective for now. And we went through 15 days of rigorous conversations about curation, about contemporary art, about the political and socio-political implications and responsibility of it, what is public, so on and so forth. And spring of 2022, the exhibition was scheduled after a few delays and postponed calendars because of third wave. This was because of the third wave. What is important is to note that we still had 21 archival boxes in the exhibit, and this was not necessarily now only from the participants of constructing personal archives. So between curating the program and becoming the fellow, I think my role as a curator also expanded, where I said, now if the curatorial note is about political responsibility, it's also about reaching out to a larger community, a larger audience, both, and letting them know, rather than making this a very internal exercise only for these 20, 30, or 40 people who have been reaching out to us. So we wrote to as many people in Bangalore, Bombay, Ahmedabad we knew, even to our own invited archivists. So within the group or within the CPA workshops, we told them that if you know somebody who would be interested or who would want to take something up like this and be a part of the curatorial provocation, please let us know and we will coordinate with them. Right? Um, so we had, so the 21 basically were now, some of them were CPA participants and some of them were interests, like, okay, we want to be a part of such a conversation. So what over here was critical to highlight is also for us the idea of curation becoming more and more clearer. That we are not looking at curation as a space of um, art shows, contemporary art shows, or a space where people just come, see, and go, or come, walk, see, and go. They actually come and engage with the exhibits. It's not prohibiting, it's enabling. And in that process, we are opening up conversations about archiving in um, personal sense, archiving for the region or community, archiving, what does archiving mean in India, and hopefully expand these conversations into the South Asian context also. Um, I think why I also highlight over here about the furniture is to keep in mind that as a spatial designer, we think through space in terms of curation, but it's also important to us, or to me particularly, is to not treat it as another aspiration for creating spaces which cannot be dissolved or which cannot be sustainable. It was important that things are rented, things can go back, or they can go back into the ground, but not become more wastage and more ecologically harmful. And keeping to that kind of stricture and have other curatorial bindings together, this can become sometimes very tight in terms of the boundaries that you're drawing, but they are important, I feel. What you see on the left is a snapshot from the video which was sent um, to all the people who were interested or who were invited. It was a close invitation. In the earlier part of the video invitation, I talk about where the idea of kitchen to kacheri comes from. It was a response to the Central Vista project, the commentary about changing of the museum and the archives, and really asking, do personal histories really find a place in these public institutions? And from there, I shift the tone of the invitation and I say, if this is something that you are intrigued by and you think your personal history could become a part of this dialogue, then here are the instructions or sort of steps for you to participate, right? So again, enabling rather than deciding for somebody else what should happen to their history. On the right side is the emerging curatorial note that we wrote. That what are we trying to do here? How did we arrive at the idea of care, custodianship, and construction through presentation of personal histories in a way. What was also very critical for us at that stage, which also again happened in the second edition, is to tell everyone that this is not a museum or a museumification. It's not a display. It's not going to be beautified. It will be as crass as you see it in this image. Archives have archival boxes or board boxes, cardboard boxes, and people learn to not be enamored by the quality of the container, but really the care with which things have been presented inside. Or they should be more interested in the stories that were published on the boxes, right? Each box had its own label and stories, and you should want to open it because of that, not because the box is pretty looking. And even though these three archivists chose to send different kinds of boxes because the box also had a story to tell, we are very happy to observe that this was still not becoming a reason for people to pick only these three and not the cardboard boxes. And the third layer always has been programming or in more invitation, right? So the exhibition space doesn't become a full stop. That is where conversations can flow further, or people who are now seeing the exhibition on day one or who have read about this flyer in the newspaper and want to bring their archives, there is always room to grow in a curatorial sense. So this is Avni from Patni Archives was obviously exhibiting in the exhibition and also wanted to have a meeting with Dikshika Talsi, who is a textile conservator, about some of the old family heirloom. And we said, why should a meeting okay, why can't a meeting also happen here, right? So when we are saying that our curation is also a place for deliberation and decision making, then that is where we could change the way programming and conversations is also thought about. So we did meetings, we did unboxing, we didn't necessarily get into praise of the exhibition or launch of, oh, it's so nicely done, but we said let's have more critical or engaged conversations. And then these were flyers which were put out in English and Hindi in the newspaper for people to bring more histories to the exhibition from Delhi. And even within the space, how do you continue to enable? So the policy was very important, the way it was written, um, or the fact that somebody chose to sit on the floor and you help them sit on the floor, make sure that the boxes remain clean. But or at one point, we also had more people in the space. So all three chairs were occupied. Floor was not necessarily the first choice for some people, so brought in more chairs and so on and so forth. And finally, connecting the conversation back to the space. So, how do we leave the space at the end? That responsibility also becomes equally critical, right? Um, Making sure all the boxes go back safely, but also what happens to the waste, what happens to the furniture or the light, everything sort of can become a part of the thinking process. So then, I mean, these exhibitions are very exhausting. I have to be very honest. And it was important to take a break, take a back seat. So when I came back in April, I said, oh no, now for a year, no more exhibitions. But then when Bangalore Design Week reached out to us in very short duration around September end, and they said, why don't you now do something in Bangalore? High time, the world has opened up. Before this, we were doing something called design dialogues in Bangalore. Um, or I've done other public curatorials through Shishti, where I was initially employed. But we hadn't done something of this kind yet. And hence, we were still not sure, but we wanted to. So I wanted to look at why am I resituating practice, if we had to, into Bangalore. Or any other city for that matter of fact. And there were very strong critical thoughts from the first edition of Kitchen to Kacheri. So when it comes to taking things to Bangalore, we had done design dialogues. So that's already a form of knowledge that we were producing. And then we had started getting into personal archiving, becoming a form of um, interactive exhibition engagement spaces. So could these two come together, right? This is one thought that was brewing. And in the meanwhile, I was also a part of, interestingly, a fellowship course with the Alternative Art School in New York. And it was just serendipitous that over there, we were supposed to do a project or a proposal on community engagement. And some conversation between me and my team member led to the question about belonging in neighborhoods and how this is becoming a threat in the country, even in Australia, my teammate from Australia, but also in other parts of the world, where we are so gullible to the socio-political narrative, where somebody is seen as the other, basically. Um, Suddenly you call somebody not from here, or you don't belong here, or you are less of a native than somebody else. And these questions for me have been important also because this comes up a lot more in heritage conservation also, where people are evacuated in the name of heritage sites and pristining the site area. So, and the third interesting thing which was happening is the CPA workshops that we're doing now, where, for example, this ensemble from the last to last workshop in Goethe Institute, which Radhika brought, where she also brought things that belongs to her family from Mangalore. She also brought things um, which belong to Mr. S.L. Bhatia from the museum. And all of these come from different locations and different places. All these people have come from different places. And right now, they are a very critical part of Bangalore's history. So I had this ensemble right in front of my eyes while the proposal was being written for Bangalore Design Week. And these were kind of questions that had come up any which ways from kitchen to kacheri. That ultimately we were in an art gallery. What if we were not? Would it have been a very different kind of public engagement? So, writing about Bangalore and thinking about Bangalore through its neighborhood histories seemed like a very very obvious thing to come next to our minds. And we put out an open call, this time a very open call. So we really just didn't reach out to people we knew. Wanted to go out there to the city and say, do you have neighborhood histories to bring on board, and we could all together co-curate a public exhibition based on our own experience with having done kitchen to kacheri. And again, in the open call, it was important for us to have FAQs, um, so that we are telling the readers that, okay, here are the basic things that you need to know. What is an archive? Why are we doing this? And how will you make sure that you're not infringing copyrights? So these three questions, which were important, because we didn't know the public, right? We can't identify them. Whereas in Kitchen to Kacheri, because we had reached out to very specific people only, and we had already been in conversation with them about these things, they these questions were not necessarily part of the open call, but then they became a part of the discussion that we did with them on the Google Meet. I also have to credit over here the fact that Deccan Herald correspondent reaching out to us really helped. So I remember when we were writing the proposal to Bangalore Design Week, asking them that, listen, this time we want to go out all public. Do you have connections with newspaper or with radio? Because only Instagram, Facebook, and our emailers will not do the job. That remains a very closed network. It's not necessarily public. And while Bangalore Design Week was going to try, we were going to write to news correspondents that we knew. You never know whether they'll pick up the story. So the fact that they picked up actually had a bigger impact than the social media reach. And I think that observation falling through was very important for me at this stage as a practitioner, that yes, community engagement needs public media representation a lot more than we can imagine. Then coming back to, we interacted in more than one ways. We had volunteers along with Shivali going on site in Yashwantpur, me visiting some of the community members who had emailed us because of the Deccan Herald news or the story, and then Srinidhi and Aparna from this group who had shown interest. We connected with them online to guide all of them in their own ways as to how they could tell us their story, what kind of archives can they give us, or we could choose and then bring it to site. This is what conspired at the end of it at the metro station. As you can see, aesthetics was not really important, right? So our way of thinking is, first, how do you create the engagement? Where will the content come from? How is the community feeling about it? So what we also observed, we didn't like that the back tags really became so prominent. So we corrected this eventually. But this photograph still is important to talk through. And then we recreated a similar space, but looks built more on the ideas of a cloakroom, unlike Kitchen to Kacheri, where it was a public records room or a public office. But the toolkit sort of remains the same. I don't think the interest in the long term is to marry to this toolkit also, but to also say that yes, does it add, and that's a question now for us to explore further. Does it add any merit if we continue to work with the same toolkit? Because it's also coming from public records room or a cloakroom, but it is also coming from the idea of a traditional archive. Because the traditional archive would also have slotted angle racks. It's easier to pull out your archives rather than closed cabinets. It lets your material breathe. So archiving, which is the base or the underlying thought, continues to remain throughout different editions of this community engagement initiatives. And then in this edition, we saw both kinds of audiences, unlike the previous one, because I think we only made room for it, knowing that people might not have enough information about it, or more knowledge about what we are doing, or more time. So we either were ready to show them. So that's my colleague Shivali, who continuously showed if they didn't want to wear the gloves and sign the policy. But we also had audiences who wanted to do the whole procedure themselves and engage without being told the story. And I think there is a major difference in people reading it and interpreting it themselves versus us doing it, because I know our version of the story also kept changing and evolving over the 9 days. This is a closer look into what the boxes, archival boxes and the trunks and the bags held. So from the variety of archival material, the way it was preserved, um, the kind of boxes and trunks also that we found, concerns about preservation, which were very critical in some cases. Some cases, things were not that old, so it's okay. But you can see how community members chose to take ultra care in terms of using a bubble wrap, or this is coming from Radhika, who already has now knowledge of archiving. Whereas in these cases where we got it without any covering, we eventually did some sort of packaging and covering of the archival materials um, on site and through workshops. This is the kind of stories. I will stop at this at the end, but I'm only choosing two stories just to give a sense that we got both. We got stories of on ground experiences of workers, labor class, cobbler. They had very different stories to tell in terms of how they have made Bangalore their home. Whereas somebody from a more urban, privileged class of the society might have a very different emotion when it comes to archival histories. And this was equally important to identify for our readers. This also happened in Kitchen to Kacheri, but you can imagine, right? So it's still the urban reading audience. And in that, there was a variation of being queer, or, a remarriage of a widow. So the variation of emotional uh, differences is within certain spectrum. You still know that the entire spectrum is quote unquote privileged, provided for, and is now talking about these concerns. Whereas when you disturb this equilibrium and bring in the other sections of the society, um, I think the reading of the emotions is way more drastic. So I remember one or two readers of this edition actually said that it was too overwhelming to read such differences in the society when you're reading personal narratives. And again, public programming was critical. And this time we were holding a public space. So it meant very different things. We didn't really worry about whether we have audience or not, because there was always a constantly flowing audience. And it was the for both of us, from us who were holding the archive space, the cloakroom archive, and the ones who were presenting as our invited guests or speakers. All of us were in some sense performing. We had put ourselves out there. And I think even the participating archivists were performing, because you're suddenly in a more vulnerable, open space. So, how do you show things? How do you tell about things? So, here is Srinidhi, who brought his archival boxes into the presentation area and opened up a few things that he wanted the audiences to see. Whereas on the right side is an architecture team called Masons Inc., who had brought along a presentation of the practice that they do and why it resonates for them to be a part of such a conversation. The conversations were obviously around um, histories, personal or collective or community, but from the neighborhood, how they actually sort of can be instrumental in rethinking about neighborhoods, about architecture, about the places we live in and we inhabit or we build for ourselves. Even if it's not personal spaces only, it could also be the public. Or rather, I should have said it's obvious for personal spaces, but it should also be considered for public structures or public spaces that we make. So it was very befitting to have the last dialogue sitting in the metro station and ask that why does a metro station need to be so blend, so characterless? Can we not think about changing stories, changing characters? We also don't need to stick to one history. We don't need to just show one kind of a community or one kind of an aspiration. What if there was room for changing narratives within public spaces? So the livingness that we experience while we are doing these projects could be reflected onto the architecture. And there were two kinds of workshops that we had offered. I mean, they were also in relationship with each other, where very a short version of what we are doing at CPA would be floated, and we did work with certain collections, and as I said, did preservation for them. I also have Shivali's part, which I want to play in continuity, because I think it will only be fair that you hear all of it. Because what I've not gotten into depth of is the community engagement part of it on ground, right? Or community engagement in the ways that she would want to interpret. So it's not too long, it will take 10 more minutes, and I'm just going to play it for.
Hi everyone, this is Srivalli Kiran. I got the opportunity to engage with the Caring Construction project for a whole month. While I was working in the project, I always went back home with a lot of questions with respect to process responses I got from the community. One of the important questions I want to respond now as a critical throwback, and that also stitches with the other set of questions, is how neighborhood stories create community engagement. For us, in the whole process, at initial stage before starting the exhibition, we played the role of collecting neighborhood stories and representing them, which we felt very important to start the conversations and to know our neighborhood in a better way. And later during exhibition, the whole role changed to engaging with community who want to tell their own story while collecting and representing other stories, which is unlike representing our own story. It starts with why they would like to share their story. Other challenge and activities helping them to see you being honest and making them understand our intentions of the initiative and making them trust to share their stories. We had to listen without any preconceptions, feel the emotion and empathize them. It's very important to see beyond their words and into their emotion to narrate an accurate narrative that they want to express. I had to repeat their story to reconfirm so that I don't misinterpret, because their story is real and we should not be altered or filter from the reality. More often, most of the people were not always happy to share. They'll always reject your attempt to communicate with them. When you empathize, you will understand it's not easy to tell the tale of their life to a stranger. That is where I think the whole concept of these setups open up these conversations. Setting up such exhibition was not less than directing a story oriented movie, where the focus is not on only on the aesthetics and grandeur, but the whole setup should support the stories or the community you want to represent. Um, Trunks representing migration, backpacks telling the stories, archival material inside the boxes representing vivid memories from the stories. The whole setup visualized in the metro, giving a cloakroom effect. This whole setup brought curiosity among a community. What is this space has to say? What it means to them? One, it should, I'd say it makes them feel safe and make them open to engage. That has brought a lot of community people to come and engage with the space itself. And I would say the whole setup in the public space played a very important role. For all community engagement to happen, public space really played an important role. Here, the community commuters became community. It made to feel community more safe and comfortable. When we make such creative spaces access to public, the kind of audience visit the space are unexpected, and they are very open in their thought process than critiques or with criticality. Uh, and they are very open to all kind of conversations. The audience who approached the space were very diverse, ranging from different age groups, gender, in their occupation background, and each person how they interpreted the stories were also very different. Some got culturally connected, some connected to the stories, whereas some others connected to technology. My narrative with them also changed, and like my narrative with different visitors also differed based on what the narratives they bring up. But when I start with migration stories, many of them started connecting and said, yes, I'm not from Bangalore, I came here for job business. I came here that this I felt this city is more safe for my kids and from myself. And it's a very niche experience, and we didn't expect everyone who are commuting to visit the space, but talking to the people who visited us gave us real pleasure to engage and feel the sense of community. What I felt is stories narrate more stories. Many audience started telling their stories connecting to the existing material. Many got surprised to see their own city's history with a very different perspective than their own history books would had to say. Some liked the idea and carried it to their home and said to archive their parents or grandparents' material. Some curiosity was also built up around with questions like what is archiving, how it is different from art exhibition or a museum, and why it is important to cities like Bangalore. These are really interesting questions, and my answer is not straightforward for everyone with the same answer. Yeah, even I had to find it out for myself. Whenever I went back home, I started questioning this to myself. Yeah, is it what was my answer to them? And these interesting part of the work we do is it's not always the people you see represent a representation of the story. Sometimes participants will give different perspective that what you have curated. This whole process intrigued me to reflect myself daily after I go back home. Every new day came up with a new narrative and with new interpretations. Finally, what I would like to conclude is it is not one factor that driven the community to engage, and every part and at every stage of the whole process played an important role. I do not want to conclude whether it is a successful or unsuccessful with answering my question, but definitely I would like to say it's an experimental platform. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
So this is our end of the story of what happened and how caring construction happened. We are open to questions, critical feedback, thoughts, reactions.
So you think, Ishita, that this trying to create archives from a neighborhood, was it really understood by the people? And do you think you will get further inputs?
Yes, I think both. Answer both the questions is yes. Was very clear to people. So we had people have smirks and smiles when we said, we need to stop othering people in neighborhoods and all stories are important. So and people would then want to read. So even the ones who had less time, They were very curious. Oh, what is this neighborhood story? So they will come inside and read one of the bag tags. And they'd say, oh, but then that means I also can tell you story about this place. My uncle, or I would put you in touch with my elders. They will have stories about this area. So answer is yes, people have understood the importance of it. And as I'm saying, the more I'm thinking about it, it's relevant to a place like Bangalore. If you ask me, this might not necessarily be a context which will work for um Ahmedabad, because right now it's not. So Ahmedabad, for example, it's not like, oh, Thaltej is so different than Navrangpura. These are the areas. Whereas in Bangalore, it's very evident that each neighborhood has a character, and I think it got reinstated when you guys were talking about BTM yesterday. The way Tana, Vikram, and you, all three of you have seen that area change over just a few years. So when we were recontextualizing, from kitchen to kacheri to care in construction, we were trying an experiment, as Shivali has rightly pointed out, that does neighborhood as a context work for people to position or reposition their personal histories? And now we can say, yes, it has worked. It works a lot for Bangalore. And definitely people want to give more, because I don't think everybody got to read also Deccan Herald, and it was only Deccan Herald that carried it. We tried carrying it in Kannada newspapers, but the time was too short, and we would have loved to carry it in radio also, or in a more dialogical form in some other space where people know that they can do this and they can bring their materials to such a conversation.
But after the program was over, did you get responses and stories from the neighborhood? Say, for
Oh
instance,
yeah, that's a good point. So what we haven't put in the slides, yes. So during the exhibition itself, I think we had a box with empty cards and baggage cards, and about 4 people or 5 people in total have added to the exhibition during the exhibition itself.
so it was 18 plus 5.
18 plus 5. That's right.
Now,
Yes.
what are you going to do with this collected information?
So one is this documentation, which definitely goes up, and along with it, when we are restructuring the website page, we find a way to put all the stories out there on the page of Care in Construction on our website. Because at this point we don't have funding, so if we can get funding, we'll also try that to do a digital exhibit, because that's what we had discussed with Bangalore Design Week also. They said let's first do this much, and that budget got approved. So we'll check with them if they, because they were also very keen that this can become a digital exhibit, definitely. So if they are able to fund the digital exhibit part of it, then we'll make a separate link for it and then put it on our website. If we can't do that, then at least on our own website we publish all the 23 stories with their artifacts.
Then from here, where do you want to go?
Now, I think, I mean, for Bangalore, at this point, the idea is if Bangalore Design Week continues to do Bangalore Design Week, which their plan is for next 4 5 years, we want to do it for other neighborhoods. Because as you saw, the interest was to do it about Yashwantpur, but the time was too less. So redo one for Yashwantpur with a bit more time and thoroughness. So each neighborhood gets its own exhibit and engaging space. And in the long term, can all of these 5 years into 20 stories, so 100 exhibits or 100 stories or 100 plus stories, can it become a more permanent um, proposal for somebody? I don't know.
It will also
That
be
is a
a
very much bigger.
it will also be a record of the history of the city itself,
Yes,
because
that's what I mean to
nobody.
say.
Ah,
So if state archives wants to give us a shelf, or library wants to give us a shelf, but these are things we can also propose to them once we grow. So the actual 5 years of doing this in Bangalore should happen. So that is one direction. The second direction is itself community engagement and constructing personal archives, going to other cities and seeing if this recontextualization of personal histories in different cities is something that is becoming an important form of engagement for personal projects, personal archiving projects.
Another idea is, why don't you address this to students of history, either in the universities? Maybe they
Hmm.
would be interested to do some interning, because, for example, if you take Christ, they have got a compulsory 2 months program for internship in their second year. So
Hmm.
why don't you think of taking this, so that this habit of archiving is inculcated at a very young age, and it
Hmm.
is the history students who can understand it much more, and then can also give their best and help you in taking this forward.
Sounds good. Yeah, very good idea. And I think again, we can do it through Bangalore Design Week because they are also interested in bringing colleges on board for the
Yes.
long term. So they
Yeah.
want to do electives or modules for different colleges. So I can actually write to them because we have to give them sort of a closing report or feedback, whatever, that how would we want to engage in the coming years. So one is we keep doing it in other neighborhoods, and I will add this point that whichever other historical course, history courses that they are able to tie up with, or if they can initiate, we can initiate a conversation and they can support us from the back end. And we can do electives or modules or internships with those students. That's a wonderful idea because somebody will need to pay for that internship. One of the things we are very consciously trying to do at Curating for Culture is be very ethical about our practice. So, not do free business. In this, the volunteers who were young students coming in sort of at no charge, but then, of course, we try to um, in our little humble ways treat them, if you want to call it, but not do much of it pro bono, and make sure that somebody is funding, supporting, so that even if it's a very basic honorarium that you give to the students in terms of funding, we crack that relationship. So
Yeah.
that is why I'm saying that I would want to do it with Bangalore Design Week if possible.
Good. Thank
Good,
you.
good. Thank you so much for that idea. Anybody else? Any thoughts, questions?
I was thinking, how can this, be repeated, replicated for my town? Ulhasnagar is a town that has, very has had very interesting histories. And in fact, there was an architecture student who had come to me asking me for, any kind of help because she wanted to trace the history or, look at Sindhi households in the town. So this is actually a very, great idea. And if there is a way by which you could do the, other towns and other cities also, this can be extended in such beautiful ways.
Yes, and we really want to do that. So let's keep this conversation going in terms of what can happen at Ulhasnagar. We
Yeah,
respond to the area's own nerve, right? So we didn't want to copy paste, or we didn't want to bring the conversation about Central Vista to Bangalore. And
mm,
similarly, we would not want to take the whole idea of migration and othering to Ulhasnagar. So what in Ulhasnagar can become its um, pressing nerve to sort of hit upon, not in a sadistic way, but something that intrigues people, something that pushes them to want to think about their personal histories, bring it out. It could also be household projects. So we might, think about if it's about architecture of Sindhi households, and we want to go from one household to the other in the form of an exhibition. So there are
mm,
many more ways to sort of recontextualize the interest.
mm.
Yes, we would be interested. And if you can think about, again, as I said, who would be able to support this, or we could co-author a grant proposal or something like that
That's wonderful.
for a organization who is interested in areas of Ulhasnagar. So basically, somebody in Bombay,
Mm.
simply put. Somebody in Bombay would be a good person or a good organization to reach out to, Bombay or Maharashtra, or who's interested in architectural history. And we could write a grant proposal and yes, try this for a smaller town neighborhood as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Interesting. Thank you so much. Writing all of this down as you all are saying. Kaustubh, Nijum, any thoughts, any clarifications, any ideas about it?
Yes, I just love to appreciate the selection of location as it's a metro station.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, really like rethinking the space of. It's not an exhibition though, but the location of engagement. It's like it's really interesting and crucial to think about.
Yeah.
And also, when I was like planning for a kind of mobile caravan, I have already mentioned in previous workshops. So it
Yes.
was somehow like collecting the photographic stories of the like neighborhood. It can be a mobile van which could be full of blank books and field books, and the neighborhood people can I mean join through their stories and all that. So I have planned in the city of Chandanagar in
Hmm.
Hubli. So
Okay.
Chandanagar is also a very historical city with
Hmm.
colonial history, French histories, and etc. So I was planning for that, but it's like I like warmed up my thoughts also after seeing this. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I think the whole idea should be that each project is, in my mind, that the way I showed the journey right now, each project is influencing another project. So when you are thinking of this idea, and we will all anyways be talking about in 2 months, how are you doing your public engagement? It would be nice if there's anything in this that you want to use or work with, we can share those tools with you, and you can build your mobile caravan and actually take your project into that caravan, and also leave space for people to um, come and give their histories or donate their histories and try out that kind of a model for Chandanagar. So I think there is already, I can see the project speaking to each other.
Yes, actually, I have applied for a few organizations for funds and all. So I'm working for some collaboration also, like who can collaborate with the kind of more ideas and strategies also I need. And because I'm a very newborn baby here, I'm not. I don't have that much experiences and all. So yeah,
Right.
it's just a thought, but yeah, I have like planned the kind of structure of that caravan and how it could
Fantastic.
be. So it would be like uh, it would develop gradually, I think. So it would take time definitely. And also we are
Mhm.
planning for a project in Hyderabad Literary Festival, so which is actually about bookmaking with school childrens. So I mean with like constructing their stories in a and their own book, the personal book, with archiving their stories, like everyday stories of whatever they can. So it's like we have also like planning for that workshop kind of engagement in Hyderabad. So with Professor Boisali Ghosh. So yeah, it's like that. It's happening. It's a extension of a project called Dark, which is actually conceived by University of I mean Wisconsin Madison.
Okay.
So it's like extension of that project. It's like that. So it's like interconnecting the things only. So
Yes,
it's
exactly
really,
my
I
point.
mean, interesting
Yeah.
to see the kind of development. And we are also planning a like workshop in terms of engagement with school children in Hyderabad.
Mhm.
Is is in Hyderabad Literary Festival this year. So it's also about making self-published book with personal histories, personal stories. I mean, students or I mean the candidates, whatever I can share. So they will responsible for making their own book, own syllabus or something like that. It would be their stories, or so we are planning for that. It's a kind of community engagement. It would happen. So their photographs, the archival materials they can bring, so it's happening like yeah in that way. And
Fantastic.
this is actually an extension of a project called Dark I was been
Hmm.
mentioning. It was conceived by University of Wisconsin Madison. So it's a kind of extension here we are planning. So
Okay.
yeah, it's
Fantastic.
happening. The like I
Keep
mean
us
multiple
posted.
pro-
Yeah.
yes multiple projects and things. I mean thoughts are like connecting each other and your and also with your works and your engagements. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Nice. So yeah, keep us posted, and any which ways we can collaborate or help, or as I said, share any of these tools. Let
Yes,
us know.
yes, definitely. Yeah,
Perfect.
yeah, yeah. Hmm. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you everyone for sitting through both the summation part of it, the exercise today. So this Sunday became a little busier than the last workshop Sundays that we have taken it lightly and listening to our presentations and sharing your thoughts about it. Thank you so much.